And we are live, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, geeks of all sorts and shapes and sizes and ages and whatnot, because we're super inclusive. Welcome to another episode of the Geek Book Club, your monthly online repository for geeks what books read and stuff. So every month we pick a book, we read it, we come to this online platform to share a discussion about it. You get to join into that conversation, have a good time. And, we think it's a lot of fun. I like having book clubs and social activities to jump into. And I think if you're like-minded, then this is a fun resource for you too. I'm rambling this month. Taken to the high seas. This is a book that Andrew, you brought to the table. Mr. Andrew Wallace, of course, my lovely and delightful co-host on these geek book reading adventures. Welcome. Thank you for joining me this month on the show.
Oh, well, thank you, Juan. I am damned excited to talk about this book.
Damned excited. He's already into PG swearing territory, folks.
Pip, pip, cheerio. Yes, I'm quite excited. The most British book that I've ever read.
Okay, so I mean, we hipped you to The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and that book is British. That is a British hallmark of science fiction, comedy, satirical literature. Master and Commander is British.
Yes, this is not only British; it's period British.
Yeah, from
century British.
I was going to say we might as well share what that period was.
Yes, so this is
Napoleonic War British.
Yeah, so actually, technically, it's pre-Napoleonic War, but we're getting into the minutia.
Technically correct is the best kind of correct.
This takes place. It starts out in 1800, and it follows Captain Jack Aubrey. Well. Starts out as Lieutenant Jack Aubrey, and he ends up Master and Commander, which is basically, it's kind of the rank structure where they call him Captain, but he's a Master and Commander versus Post Captain, which is the next rank. But he earns a commission of Master and Commander and takes command of the HMS Sophie, a brig, a two-masted brig, not what you see in, say, the film, the HMS Surprise, which is a three-masted frigate. So it's pretty exciting. It takes place mainly in the Mediterranean, and it basically goes through him and his friend who he meets, Dr. Stephen Matern, who is a physician, not surgeon, a physician. So he's a little overqualified for his role as a ship surgeon, and it follows their adventures against the Spanish and the French in the early parts of pre-Napoleonic France.
So I think one of the things that we should detail right off the bat, this is an interesting book to read if you're coming at this film first.
Absolutely.
So I absolutely loved the Master and Commander Far Side of the World, the film starring Russell Crowe. What I didn't fully understand, or what I didn't fully realize before you passed this book my way, was this first book is only part of the movie, and the movie then also borrows pieces from, what is it, the 10th book in the series?
Yeah, Far Side of the World, which I've actually got back there.
so this is a 20 book series of naval adventures, and I like in remembering the film, I wonder what were the film producers' plans for continuing the series, because you knew they wanted to make it a franchise, but you're already books 1 and 10. Were they going to do like books 2 and 11, and then maybe we could do books 3 and 4, and then we could staple some other? I mean, again, it's almost like the classic days of comic book films where they would take comic book characters and then completely ignore all of the literary adventures from the comics, because Hollywood knew what it was doing in making the movie. And then they kind of did the same thing with pre-Napoleonic War, naval combat, historical fiction. And that was kind of a difficult concept to wrap my brain around.
Well, and it's interesting too, because there's the time span that these books take. These books cover a big, long time span, as I understand it, going from the pre-Napoleon taking power through the end of Napoleon, essentially, and like post Battle of Trafalgar.
Okay.
Actually, for a little bit after that. Well, it's interesting because they've talked about, there's been back and forth for the past since 2003 about a sequel to the film, and I mean at this point they could still do it. He would Russell Crowe would roughly be about the right physique for Jack Aubrey at this many years later from the book, as I understand it. But also like they could go to, to a first rate, ship of the line where it has 88 guns or whatnot and have it, make it bigger like Hollywood always does.
Right.
But one thing that the book does differently than the film does, if you've seen the film, is the film basically doesn't touch land except for the Galapagos and that little bit where they're near Brazil. This book anyway does touch land, like they're spending time around Malta, Gibraltar, and I found for me some of those sections kind of slowed down for me. I was very much more engaged when they're actually on the seas, on the Mediterranean, doing their awesome nautical stuff, and going out and hunting French and Spanish ships. So it's
there definitely does seem to be a narrative structure at play, which I mean, because we've talked about this with other books and other stories, that accessibility is important when we're talking about a more modern author. They're writing from a more modern perspective, and the voice is going to be a little bit more accessible to people who are of a certain age today. This having been written trying to emulate the time period of where these characters are coming from makes some of the exposition and some of the storytelling structure, in my opinion, very difficult to get a handle on. So what you're talking about, like, I think this author, Patrick O'Brien, does an incredible job with action. When he's describing action and when he's talking about naval combat and naval tactics and the discipline of the crew and getting them in shape and the boat's exploits in terms of because we're going to talk about this a little bit later too, how the British Navy was kind of just like a bunch of rogues out looking for treasure and adventure. Like, they didn't seem too dissimilar from our modern day depiction of pirates in a way.
Yeah, especially like privateers too, when we get into that.
Definitely. And we in a modern era where our military has been elevated to a certain role and a certain status in popular culture, like this almost seems like sort of an outright war profiteering, which would be a bit unseemly given today's rules and code of conduct on the battlefield. But getting back to this, and Andrew, I mean, because I know this is a time period you really enjoy, and this is a style of fiction that you really enjoy, and you're really into the open seas and boats and navies and different period kinds of combat. But the narrative structure in this book, doesn't it strike you less as one continuous novelization through line, like a story with a beginning, middle, and end? And it almost reads like it could be a series of captain's logs or diary entries or slices of life, which I think was one of the things that made this book very difficult for me to get a handle on through the first third. The first third of this book was a tough read for me. I would probably admit to having some attention issues, and this book was definitely preying on my personal inability to stay stapled on to the words on the printed page.
I'd agree with that. I view it as it seems like they depict it more as a window into the lives of these people, of Stephen Maturin and Jack Aubrey. Like, you get, because I've read as far forward as HM, like I first read these back in around 2003, 2004. And I got as far forward as the third book, which was HMS Surprise. And it does feel a bit like it's almost a prologue in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very much presented more like it's a window into their lives, into this career, and it's like, oh, this is where it's starting off, and then there's going to be more coming, and it lends itself very much to adding not having an end to the series, essentially, the way they have it set up. Because, well, I mean, he didn't, and Patrick O'Brien died before he finishes his the book, like his, I
Right.
won't
So I
say
mean,
it's his final book, but I don't know if it was planned as his final book, because it's just, well, what happens after Napoleon's defeated then,
so, but I mean, one of the things, and so that kind of points me to when you're talking about, whether or not there was some idea of a way to end the series, or if these were stories that could kind of go on forever, even within this one book, contained within this one book, each chapter sort of reads as its own slice of events. That, I mean, there's a through line. There's obviously a continuity. There's a continuity of characters. Characters' actions and indiscretions have consequences for them later on in the book, but there doesn't seem to be a distinct tie or through line, which really helps the reader. I feel, again, I know plenty of people will probably disagree with me, but that it doesn't really seem to feel like the story has that cohesive narrative. And I think one of the things, because what you were talking about is the relationship between our captain and our doctor, I feel kind of poles of split focus. Like each individual's experiences are equally as important, and there isn't one cohesive sort of omniscient narrator which would tie those two together, nor is there, this is, kind of like what we went through with what was it, the science fiction novel we read, The Expanse.
Left Hand of Darkness.
No, The Expanse.
Oh, The Expanse. Derp. Yes, yeah.
So I mean, the first book of the Expanse series, where we've got two distinctly individual teams of people that come together, but whenever a chapter changes, the authors literally tell you, now this chapter is going to be from the perspective of the detective. That's such a modern TV or modern film idea. Like, they are writing that novel with the idea of a screenplay in mind. Like, they're telling you the exterior shot for the opening of this scene, and they're telling you who the first character is to walk into that scene before you even started reading that chapter. And I hate to say that I'm enough of a modern day science fiction junkie that I kind of needed that here. I needed a little hand holding. I needed Patrick O'Brien to kind of take pity on me and pat me on the head. Like, this chapter's gonna be about the doctor. Like, oh, I can just shovel more popcorn in my face while I'm trying to read my Kindle.
Well, it's like as I was reading through it, like it's interesting because when I first read it,
right?
So this is so initially I was very much into the nautical side of things, and I actually had a wonderful supplementary book here that my family gave me back in the day, called Patrick O'Brien's Navy. That is a great supplemental knowledge, book of supplemental knowledge for this that really helps. But so when I first read through it, I kind of took the Jack Aubrey as the person I was viewing the lens of the story through, and through his experiences and his rationale for everything. And going through the second time, I kind of went through it on Stephen Matrin's side of his rationale of not knowing anything about anything nautical and being kind of medically ahead of his time. And I think that O'Brien did that on purpose, to be able to access people on either side, because both of these men are basically polar opposites of each other, and so the readers are going to fall somewhere in between, and so it's up to the reader's personal experiences to decide where they're going to end up kind of viewing the lens through, especially through their first read through. I think it was his intention.
Well, no, I completely agree. I think that's definitely his intention. And I think it would have worked for the readers of the time when these books were first published.
Because this one was... Oh, sorry, didn't mean to.
No, go ahead. I mean, because I also feel like there's a style here which is slightly anachronistic. Like, we don't write dialogue this way anymore.
Because this is published in 1970.
So given just that little bit of a window 30, 40 years, the difference in storytelling mechanics and the influence of film and television and other media over the way that we tell stories, this to me feels like that separation. Like his structure, his style, his narrative belong to a different age, which takes me as the reader just that little bit of time to acclimate, to try. I mean, even this is silly. This is such a silly thing for me to complain about. But when he writes dialogue, he only uses the single quote. He doesn't use double quote. So there would be times where I'd be reading through and like a possessive would actually trick my brain into saying, well, that was the end of it. No, wait, no, here's another thing. Oh, but there's a little extra. Okay, so where does the quote stop? But then the way that he's writing the dialogue for the characters is also Britishly anachronistic too, where two characters will be sitting down to dinner in the midst of a discussion, and all in one passage of language from one character with no explanation from an omniscient narrator and no interruption from the other character. Well, and yes, I think that would be quite a lovely. Oh, was that a bird? I've always wanted to see one of those birds. I hope I'll get to see more of that on my adventures. But I digress. Back to what you were asking me about your boat, and I think it would be a lovely idea to set sail. I mean, like, we don't really craft language and stories that way anymore. The British side is, as I guarantee you, I guarantee that is an authentic representation of a conversation that two people might have. This sort of erudite rambling monologuing against each other with the correct, social graces being displayed, and I'm sure that's accurate, but it's really hard to read. It's kind of like if you were to take like not in how politicized this is, but like if you write out what Trump says versus if you watch him speak, the mannerisms, the repetition, the emphasis on what he's saying, he's somewhat intelligible when he's talking. But if you just read what he says, it's a lot more difficult to glean the meaning of what he's trying to accomplish. Now, Patrick O'Brien is not doing that. I'm not trying to say that's synonymous. But I almost feel like, again, like I needed him to pat me on the head and give me a couple little more breaks, or to shape the conversation, or to edit some of the dialogue back and forth in a way that read more like a screenplay. I'm just sort of so programmed by how we write dialogue and how we don't take certain things for granted. Like an aside in the middle of a thought from one character it was easy for me to get lost in what those two characters were trying to accomplish. And again, because I look at this from the standpoint of like a screenplay, like every single interaction between two characters should have a goal, or should have a conflict, or should represent a change in power, or in status, or in education. And I don't think the book ever settles on, to your point, and because I agree with you, the book could be consumed following the exploits of a heroic captain, or could be consumed with the idea of viewing the exploits of the captain through the eyes of a layperson, the doctor. But I don't think the book makes a decision on that. So because the book doesn't have a clear point, it's like if you were going to do a Star Trek book, you could do a Star Trek book from the perspective of Captain Picard, or you could do a book from the perspective of Data talking about Captain Picard. And those are two, you could have the exact same events, but those would be two very different stories. And in Master and Commander, because we're floating the idea of the heroic captain versus the novice layperson doctor, I think it's more difficult for the audience, a modern audience, me personally. I think it's more difficult for me to make a decision on whose eyes I'm viewing this story through, which means I also have a hard time interpreting what value do I put on the adventure. If it's just the captain's perspective, I might be I might be willing to say like, oh, well, maybe he's overselling or underselling his exploits versus when the doctor's describing something that he thought was amazing because the doctor's not as experienced. Maybe he's blowing something out of proportion, but I don't know. I don't know if that's really as big a deal as they're trying to make it out to be, or do I trust the voice of who's describing these events to me? But that ultimately just doesn't seem to matter. So
well, it's different a little bit with in the story, like from some of the later books. It's a little bit more. They complement each other a little bit more. I believe it's in. I believe that it is in Far Side of the World, where there's a big theme of Stephen Maturin falling overboard. It just happens. He never gets better about it. And he falls overboard at night, and Jack's like, "Oh crap!" and goes after him. And the surprise just kind of keeps on going, and they get picked up by these tribal these native women, and so Steven's so Jack's out of his element, and Steven's kind of going through, and there's some play between that, and it's kind of them on their own together, which is kind of nice. You run into the hijinks of, turns out this particular group doesn't like men that much because Steven realizes that they have these little purses on them, but they're made out of the scrotums of the men from their tribe, and so they have to go through that. Why didn't you have me
read that book?
I know.
I mean, already you bringing up this story has wrecked our YouTube monetization anyway.
Oh, no.
I might as well have enjoyed Scrotum Purse book.
Well, hey, YouTube, it is in the context of a novel, you know?
It doesn't matter. They don't even, what's hilarious, they don't even notify me anymore. I get these emails out of the blue like, your video's now safe for ads. And you're like, you never told me it wasn't, but I digress.
Yeah. But yeah, it's like I think part of it's like the locale. Like I think that the story of Master and Commander it's a little more Jack Aubrey nautical heavy versus the naturalist side of it's a little bit heavier on Jack as far as introducing everything, because one thing with Master Commander is it's introducing a lot of concepts at the beginning. And like throughout, basically this entire story is introducing these concepts.
Yeah.
And then once you get into Post Captain, which is actually, I read Post Captain and I loved Post Captain as well. Like it gets to develop a little bit more, and you get a lot more of the relationship between these characters, because a lot of the characters that are in that are on in this move on and continue through all the stories, like Bondin, there's a few different characters like Killick, his personal a lot of people actually you see in the film actually go on through. So it's which was not uncommon during that era of having the same people stick with you from crew to crew to crew. So that's part of the problems we had was it was introduced. It was basically the Batman Begins sort of thing where it's like everything's kind of building up, but it's kind of hard. It's more interesting once you get into more exotic territory. As far as the overall narrative, there's, but yeah, it's, I don't know. I really, the one thing I really do love about the series is, Jack, the character of Jack Aubrey, even though he's fictitious, he is actually inspired by a real person named Thomas Cochrane. He is very widely, pretty much, in a lot of circles, known as the best Age of Sail frigate captain in history. Actually, a lot of what happens in this book is very much mirrors what happened in real life. He, like Jack Aubrey, he was very much a go-getter as far as his duty in going at the enemy. He had a tumultuous relationship with his superior officers, which got him into trouble, which is why he got the command of the HMS Speedy instead of the HMS Sophie, which is what Jack gets in this. This is a small brig. What did I put? It was a 14-gun brig, which is
Hold on, let me see if I can screen share. So, because you sent me a picture of what a brig looks like, and let me see if I can.
That is a painting of right here is a painting of somebody depicted of the HMS Sophie, actually.
Oh, wow. So this is actually the boat that.
Yes.
Okay, and this is
Hmm.
what they based the Sophie on.
Yes. Well, no, this is the Sophie, not the Speedy. I know they're so similarly named, but this was, as I understood it, was the depiction of the Sophie. But yes, essentially
Okay.
they're interchangeable at this point. I'm going to be going between them. I'll try my best to note between them. And so basically, they're given. Uh,
Before you move on, because
Oh,
you
okay.
know more about this stuff, a brig this size would not necessarily be considered a like a demonstrably desirable command.
Correct.
Like
It's
this isn't like a
80 men
total.
on board.
Right. Okay. So
Yeah.
so this is someone not necessarily a punishment, because he is getting a promotion from lieutenant to master and commander of this boat, but it's not like he's the flagship of the Federation or anything like that.
Right. Absolutely. He's not getting like a frigate or anything at this point. And most people who get a frigate would get like or I think it's around post captain. There's some extra information in my supplementary book about that actually. But yes, so and Cochrane, like Jack Aubrey, was sent to patrol the Mediterranean Sea. And so during this era, they were at war with France, this is around the French Revolution, so it's before Napoleon took power in this particular story. The Spanish are kind of allies with the French at this point, and there's Barbary pirates from the African coast that they're having to deal with. And so they're protecting these convoys that are going through and also harassing the French and Spanish fleets. Well, it's they're very much wanting to get prizes to get money out of this because the way this works is if the crew it was actually an interesting part early on in the book, one of the very first encounters. What was it? They're on deck. Stephen notices another ship going up to next to another one, and he's like, "Are they assisting them?" Nope.
No,
No.
that's bad.
Yeah, and so they're going after them, and then the whole crew is just hoping that the crew is actually dead so that they can take all of the spoils from the ship they're escorting. And it turns out they're all mad that these guys are still alive at the end of it. And so they go through this, and Thomas Cochrane kind of goes through a similar thing where there's ups and downs throughout this tour, and they come across a Zebek frigate, which we have a couple of different screenshots of, where it's a frigate, but the way that it works is like most sailing ships that you think of have square sails.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this one has its front mast has three masts. Its front mast has a square sail, and then the back ones have Latin, they're kind of triangular sails.
Okay.
That you normally what you think of, and they can kind of adjust them as you go. But part of that is it's very labor intensive, much more labor intensive than a regular square rigger. So like the Jack Aubrey and
Is that the alternate configuration?
that's one of the alternate configurations. Yes,
okay, so
that
I
have
can
in here.
show that. You keep talking. I'll go back to the screenshot.
So they're gosh, what was they had about 300 men on board.
I mean, I know you did the audiobook. I kind of feel, Andrew, like you should have read me this book.
Oh,
so
I couldn't
is
be
this
British
with it with alternate like triangular?
Yeah, there's this one, the one that the image that you're showing here is a little interesting because I see like they have it in the square rig configuration for the main mast, which is not typical, as I understand it. But part of that is it was a lot more labor intensive. So the ship that they encounter in the book, the Cacafuego, has a 32 gun frigate, so it's got over double the guns of the HMS Sophie, but it also has over 300 men on board as opposed to their 80. And so they come and they realize they come across them. The Cacafuego finds them, and they end up disguising themselves as a Dutch man of war And this actually happened to Thomas Cochrane, where they disguise themselves as a Dutch man of war and like paint and everything, and the Spanish weren't quite convinced, and so they were who they were saying they were. So they were sent a boat over to board and find out. Well, instead of shooting with a cannon or whatnot, what they did was they said, "Well, we're just back from the Barbary coast where there was some plague. Please, would you send your doctor over to see us?" Hell no! They row away.
No, we're good. No, thank you.
And they leave, and it worked. And these types of deception tactics were not uncommon. Which you would think
uncommon. I mean, like every single interaction that these characters have on the boat are like, oh, well, we're gonna fly this other country's flag. If you really think about like that in a modern context, it would be like an aircraft carrier showing up with, like a United States aircraft carrier showing up with like a German flag to sneak into an area that might not be hospitable or kind to Americans. Like that's not something we would take pride in today, in deceiving enemies or trying to gain some sort of subterfuge advantage there. I just need to bring this up because this name is historically cacafuego, like hot poop. Like that really was a book that not a book, a ship that Sir Francis Drake captured in 1579. They really named a boat Hot Poop.
Yeah. Well, in actually
flaming poop.
Don't worry, it had a much in the real the Xebec frigate that Thomas Cochrane actually fought in real life was the El Gamo. So it's a little more dignified.
Just slightly. A little bit. But yeah, that was more than a touch distracting with what little Spanish I speak. I just wanted to point that out.
Don't worry, you speak more Spanish than I do. So
I just saying I like had a hard again, your suspension of disbelief, but then to find out like, oh no, they really did name boats like that way.
Well, and it's interesting too, because in this era, you could get like the HMS Surprise, like that you see in the film and in the later books, was not, as I understand, was not originally a British built ship.
Oh yeah, no, these boats were passing back and forth like crazy throughout all of these battles and all these exploits. That made perfect sense to me, especially what with the costs of maintaining and operating a navy. When they talk about prizes, and when they talk about prize money, and they talk about recapturing and picking up materials for these kinds of things, that made sense to me that there would be sort of an honor among thieves kind of mentality. Like they encounter one boat and it was really just about raiding that boat for their stores of gunpowder. Not necessarily like, oh, well, we need to kill everybody on this boat and capture it and then, make this our prize. It was, the response was a little bit more measured based on what happens between the two crews on those vessels. So that made sense to me. But again, it is kind of interesting how little the manufacturing of that mattered. Like we wouldn't capture a Soviet stocked airfield and then just have our pilots start flying MiGs. It's an alien concept to us now in how we train and discipline and we instruct on certain pieces of equipment. So because you're really good at operating an American tank doesn't necessarily mean you can just jump right into a German tank and be just as effective.
Well, in this era, the technology was roughly equivalent.
Yeah.
Totally. For everyone, because sailing, the age of sail, I mean, it has been kind of standardized almost at this point. I mean, at this point in the story, we're about 50 years, well, less than half a century away from steam power. So it wasn't really until the advent of steam power that things really start changing, with the American Civil War and ironclads and I mean,
It's funny too, is I was just thinking, like I was about halfway through the first major battle that the Sophie is in, and I keep thinking, like, oh no, now she's gonna face down an ironclad. And you're like, well, no, this is not this kind of book. You're
Well,
not
and you know
reading.
what? We can get in once we get into kind of because later we're going to be getting into a little bit of discussion about like the film and whatnot and the depiction. If and I don't know if you guys have seen, there's a fantastic YouTube video from a channel called History Buffs. I recommend them. I cannot recommend them enough. Where they talk about the film and how historically accurate it is. When they talk about how the Acheron in the film, a lot of their shot just bounces off, and it's because they're using I've forgotten the different types of oak they use, but they layer different types of oak in between, and instead of having just one type of oak lining the hull, so it was much more durable and could take much more punishment. That's hence the U.S.'s Constitution actually was built like that. Hence why it was called Old Ironsides. And actually the main enemy in Far Side of the World, the book, is an American frigate, but in the film they didn't want to have an American be the bad guy. So I digress, but it's just Hollywood.
Those ethnocentric Hollywood producers. No. We're fine with British people being the bad guys in all of our films. We couldn't possibly be.
You seen The Patriot? It's a glorious film. No,
The Patriot's practically a documentary.
They even stab an English guy with the flag, the American flag, quite literally.
Because America.
Oh. God.
It's so great. I mean, it's tragic and awful and terrible. And yeah, but
by the way, History Buffs does a video about that film too, and it's pretty entertaining.
I'm sure. Actually, I haven't seen that one. I'm gonna have to go back and watch it because it is one of those things. Like, especially after we needed American Braveheart, you could see that was the only thing going through the producers' minds. Like, not only do we need an American Braveheart, we also needed to star the guy from Braveheart.
Well, no. It's like an inverse, because in Braveheart, he dies in the end. In spoilers, in Patriot, everyone else dies around him.
Good save. Good save. We wouldn't want to spoil either Braveheart or.
I think the statute of limitations for that particular film is passed. No,
but I know, much respect that you still had the consideration, in case you haven't seen both Braveheart and The Patriot. I need you to know that there's a spoiler coming for who dies in what films.
Yeah.
No, so real quick, right off the bat, the first third of Master and Commander is a lot of world building, and I think in the very truest sense. We had some. I feel like there were some similar parallels. You brought up The Left Hand of Darkness.
The writing style is very, very similar. I found, like, thinking about it,
and in terms of structure, where you're thrown immediately into a world that a modern reader might find a bit alien if they aren't already history buffs and fans of. Or at least educated on the nautical experience, the sailing experience, of which I come from a landlocked desert state, and I have very little.
I'm from Missouri, so it's like.
But you care about this stuff, and I mean, like, the closest I've ever gotten to, any kind of sailing experience has been like the Boy Scouts canoeing merit badge. The first third of this book is definitely an introduction to a lot of concepts. And this, to me, when you were talking about your experiences reading it, I think this is where the discord for me was happening, is I really thought this was going to be a book from the Doctor's perspective. So we follow Commander Aubrey. We follow him through an evening listening to musicians where there's an affront to his honor at this performance from an individual where they're essentially going to meet for a duel later on, and before he can make it to the duel, he's awarded this ship. His command, his rank, he gets the promotion, he gets this boat, and then goes to the person that he was going to duel with and says, "Hey, you know what, man? My bad. I was in a bad mood. Let's be friends." And then they're just friends. Yep. And then that turns out to be this really well-educated physician, this really well-educated doctor, who is also a bit down on his luck and is having some financial issues. So he convinces him to become a member of the crew, even though he's grossly overeducated and grossly overqualified to be a sawbones on a British naval vessel. And then, as soon as they're all out to sea together, there's an entire chapter of one of the other, I forget what the name of the rank of the individual who walks the doctor through his,
Oh, is it Moet?
I can't remember. I've already
There's
spaced. But they do. They spend like 5 or 6 pages just going over the sailing terms and the structure of the boat and what differentiates this boat from a larger boat and what differentiates this boat from a smaller boat. And you can tell because the distance of these 2 masts should be like this, and there would be a 3-mast boat, it would look like that, and you can tell by the shape of the sails. And
but it might be called a sloop when, you know, even though
right.
You're like, wait a minute, but it's not a sloop when he's not on board, and you know.
So we have a comment here from Gansey Tech Nerd. Patrick's narrative style of writing attracts the type of readers who can visualize every scenario in the book vividly. This isn't for the casual reader who wants a quick read. Understanding the context of the era and the history is pivotal to the storyline in Master and Commander. So one of the things that I do have to point to, though, in reading books that come from authors closer to these types of historical time periods, I don't know that I've had some of the same struggles in getting into these types of worlds. Like, I recently reread The Count of Monte Cristo, and I absolutely adore that take on revenge. You know, again, it's one of the earliest examples of like proper revenge fantasy in literature that I can point to in a satisfyingly modern kind of way. Because it's not just like, oh yeah, I killed the dude that like put me in jail. It's like I systematically destroyed the way of life for, you know, 30 or 40 people in, you know, not just bloodshed, but just in economy and family, made sure that everyone's lives were miserable because of what they did to me. I don't feel like accessing that story was as alien or as unfamiliar. But again, this book handily, Master and Commander handily pointed me towards how woefully ignorant I was of how boats work. And so then later that does pay off. I mean, it does help. You start to better understand the limitations. It's like going through a couple seasons of Star Trek and understanding what the Enterprise can and can't do. It does pay off in how he writes action, because as soon as the author points to an objective and is writing with a passion that the crew would embody in a battle or in an exploit or in something that's even just a bit more fun, I am instantly more able to follow what's happening in that scenario, what's happening in that situation. Well, as soon as they're out of that battle and they're back to just like characters talking to each other again, I have the hardest time following what's going on in the in-between segments. And that to me is just where I felt like I kept getting lost and then needing to like reread a passage or come back to this, or then sort of identify, oh, okay, I get it. So the doctor's talking to the first officer, and there's like, you know, politics involved and religion involved and different governments. Of course, Ireland, Britain, the troubles between these two land masses, which were close to each other. I remember that from my history classes, but how that has a bearing on those two characters having an interaction was difficult to hold on to with the way that dialogue was crafted for me.
Well, and I guess it's, I kind of came at it at a unique way when I first saw the film and loved it, and then watched it 2 more times in theater. But
I saw it twice in theaters. I really liked this movie. Yeah,
my sister got seasick watching it actually during the storm scene. Actually,
that's how you're doing it right.
Oh yeah. Well, and I kind of was like, wow, this is just amazing. And then I proceeded to kind of watch some of the Horatio Hornblower that they had. Then I just fully immersed myself, because at this point I was always the kid who would go and just immerse myself in a period of history. And so, you know, I would just go in and learn I was already like going in and learning, everything I could, kind of in it. And then I picked it up. So I already had a bit of that supplementary knowledge going into there, fresh in my brain, kind of churning around. And
no, so I'm so glad you brought up Horatio Hornblower, because that's a series that both my wife and I have been looking at starting fresh.
like the book series
as
or the films or the films.
The films.
Oh yeah. Those are great.
So
I love them.
Because again, we're BBC fanatics, and just again, that's a quality and a style of storytelling which, for patting me on the head and letting me sip on a box of juice while you tell me how special I am. That to me is that looks like it would be a fun adventure British style of cinema. And I bet that if I had the experience of watching Horatio Hornblower, because I'm aware, I mean, like, you can't be a fan of British cinema and a fan of British TV and not be aware of Horatio Hornblower. It's just not a series that I've ever consumed. And I bet you if I'd seen even just one of them, I would have been substantially more prepared for reading through Master and Commander.
So have you not seen, or was it a long time ago that you watched those?
Oh no, that's just it. We're thinking of, we're wanting to go back and check them out because neither of us have ever actually watched them.
Oh really?
We're both completely aware of them, and we know that they're supposed to be phenomenal stories,
so
great adventure movies, and that they're supposed to be they're supposed to be excellent.
Yeah,
just never either of us sat down and watched it. And you're talking to people. I mean, like I'm rewatching The Crown. We're cycling that kind of stuff. There are so many British properties that my wife and I are not just in the world of science fiction, like Doctor Who and stuff like that. I mean, just we're Anglophiles. We love British cinema. We love British television. And this is one that for both of us, it's rare that we have something that both of us have missed. This is one of the few that neither of us have any experience with.
Well, Jamie Bamber, aka Apollo is in it. And
yep. Oh man, no, I know, because again, it's like why it's so appropriate for him to be in Battlestar Galactica.
Oh yeah, it's great. Well, and if you loved Master Commander, you will definitely love Horatio Hornblower. Now it's there is a lower budget on it, but whatever. It's my suspension of disbelief was still about at the same level as Master.
No, in fact, I'm going to go even farther and say that the British sensibility in crafting media on shoestring budgets has almost consistently delivered a higher respect for storytelling and a better suspension of disbelief because of the way that they seek creative solutions to what would normally be a throw money at it kind of problem. Even going back to like, for me, it would be like the Pertwee or the Tom Baker era Doctor Who's, where you can tell they've got floppy cardboard sets and an alien might just be someone, wrapped up in plastic wrap and spray painted green for being some evil villain baddie guy. Even for all of that, it is so much easier to get lost in the story because they understand what they can and can't do. And they craft their stories around those limitations. It's not like cheesy 90s television where, so I mean, like, look at how poorly, like a Xena and Hercules have aged, right? Fun, campy, low budget, internationally produced television, not dissimilar from the campy, madcap, zany hijinks of a Doctor Who style adventure story. But they tried, and again, to their credit, they tried to do something really exciting, but they tried to leverage things like computer animation before it was ever ready for that kind of scrutiny or that kind of storytelling. And it instantly falls apart.
Oh, sorry.
Years after. I think, because I kind of get where you're going to go there. But
no, I was going to say, I'll warn you, there's a little bit of that in the last couple of episodes of Horatio Hornblower. Of like, they started out with a lot of models. And then they started doing a little bit of the CGI composite, and it's bad. But that's okay. It's a charm of it.
But again, they're not going out of their way to like, oh, well, we can comp in a couple boats. Okay. What about like a crazy huge flotilla and a dragon?
Or it's like simple things. Like there's an explosion and you're like, oh God, that's like clip art.
Well, because I'm completely willing to forgive them, especially when it comes to things like trying to comp in locations. Like we want to show these ships on a certain shoreline, and we don't want like modern buildings in the background. Well, you've got to come up with some creative solutions to that.
Well, and going back to Master and Commander, like even in the film, the way they handle it, like they almost never touch ground. Like they go to the Galapagos Islands, which is the same as it's been since the beginning, since it erupted from the sea.
Yes. Well, at least since its discovery from humans, trampling all over it and introducing invasive species onto that island.
It's true, but it's still a very protected ecosystem. And I mean, they even filmed on the actual Galapagos Islands during that, and they required very little compositing for it because and that was one of the smart choices that they made when they made the film, when they translated the overarching stories of the book into the film, which is why I really enjoyed the film, because I'm like you. The parts where they were not really at sea dragged on for me a little bit. And in later books, they have more about Stephen's actually kind of a spy for the British.
Spoilers!
Well,
what? Come on!
Well, no, that's like an established thing because they go through, and they kind of hint at it a little bit in one line in the film, where at the beginning where they're like, how did the Acheron come at us? And he's like, well, they have their spies in England, as do we. And he gives that little look. And that's the only time they mention it in the entire movie. But
say no more.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. And that's where I find the strength of these books lies in actually being at sea. I will say one part that stood out to me that kind of blew my suspension of disbelief was when Stephen falls all overboard, and then he comes back up just the right. He comes out like there's the two ships kind of swaying there, and he kind of comes back up, and they describe that they both bonk his head, and he kind of goes down. They have to, and he almost drowns, and they have to go after him. All I can think of is if my head,
two boats bonked your head, that you'd have.
It would be like a watermelon going, like I'd be dead. So. Yeah.
Okay, so let me ask you something. So these books are this book published. You said it was 1970. I was curious what your take on the infidelity in this book. So Aubrey is due prize money from being this war profiteering. I captured this vessel. I pulled off these amazing military maneuvers to deliver these goods. But I'm also borking one of my superior's wives.
Yeah.
Now, we know that there was this sort of heady, lusty, Victorian era, Napoleonic War era Europe was full of this kind of lustiness. But again, this was written by an author in 1970. So what do you think the commentary was on that, coming from the perspective of an author trying to stay true? I think he's doing an amazing job of staying true to the time that he's writing it from. Even the prose style is reminiscent, if a bit anachronistic, is reminiscent of the time period that he's trying to capture. I feel that's all authentic. So do you feel that was a commentary of the age of these characters, or do you think that was included as fodder, titillating for a 1970s conservative readership?
I mean, I think it's more of just showing that infidelity has happened from the beginning of time, and it's just kind of like that. It no matter when you are, that can occur in society. I a little bit kind of I had some real towards
but also in part of that is Jack is punished for it. He doesn't get the prize money that he's supposed to get, but there's a flavor in what happens that could be viewed as sort of the celebration of his bravado or of his manliness.
Well, they talk about, like, there's even between a couple of characters, they're talking about how, that girl was a little whore or something like that. They say, and I'm like, I felt uncomfortable reading that a little bit.
Yeah,
like that's like blaming. It's not. It's basically absolving Jack of it.
The
Like
slut shaming, right? No, I really feel like both you and I would have gotten along in high school with rolling our eyes at locker room talk.
Yeah, because I'm reading through this and they're playing they're even like playing Jack as almost ignorant because like because later they insinuate that she's cheating on him,
Right.
and I'm like, what? But that doesn't make what you did any good, Jack. What?
Well,
Damn
and
it.
he couldn't be that ignorant because he had to know. Like he knew his boss, and he knew his
Right.
boss was married, and he
And
were
his-
introduced to
and
that
he's
at the
like-
beginning of the book.
And he's like he's like holds his career in his hands. And of course, this is also the same type of stuff that Thomas Cochrane. Well, I don't know about any fidelity with Thomas Cochrane, but I know that he had Thomas Cochrane, who Jack Aubrey was based off of, has a very much an antagonistic relationship with his superior officers, despite the fact knowing that they hold his career in their hands, and
Now, do you think it's through figures like Thomas Cochrane that we sort of have a historical sense of celebrating the rogue officer, the shoot from the hip Captain Kirk kind of hero captain?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and I'm not gonna I'm gonna steal a quote from history buffs. It's if Trekkies have Star Trek, we have master. History buffs have Master and Commander. It's very much kind of a similar sort of feel. I mean, heck, when Nicholas Meyer, the director of Wrath of Khan, was putting together the film, he imagined it as a Horatio Hornblower in space.
Oh yeah,
That's literally the way he describes it.
Even for how a few of those moments have not aged well, because there are a couple really nitpicky things, like Scotty brings a dying crew member to the bridge.
I know that wasn't an age thing. That was just like, Scotty, why did you do this?
It's like we needed a dramatic beat here. You know what you shouldn't have done is you shouldn't have brought him to the bridge if he's dying. You should have taken him to like a first aid station at least.
Yeah.
Scotty.
McCoy's like, why'd you do that, Scotty?
You know where I'm at. Where all the medicines and the band-aids are. You should have. It's not on the bridge, Scotty. I don't know what you're doing there. But even for a few of those nitpicky moments, Wrath of Khan is my favorite depiction of Star Trek. I do not like Star Trek where everything is flippy TIE fighter action. That's Star Wars. Yep. Star Trek should be like submarine combat.
Yeah, or you know what? Or heck, even like it's you could even say, like, I even viewed a lot of the naval combat in this book kind of like the way they do in Star Trek. It's slow, deliberate, and you actually have to strategize ahead of time, well ahead of time. Like, what was it when towards the end, I guess, was spoilers for this.
We're an hour in. From here on out, I feel, because we've already discussed some of the major character points that arrive at the end of the book. If you were concerned, I apologize for not giving you bigger warnings up front. We're well into spoiler territory, but to the point you were alluding to, because I know where you're going with this one, Andrew.
Oh yeah, well it's oh lordy, I might have forgotten what I was saying, but anyway, like it's I don't know, it's, gosh, what was it? I lost my train of thought.
Oh, sorry. Because we were talking about the depiction of like Star Trek, Starfleet combat, and then we were reading this book.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so I mean, gosh, they knew, like, and actually, and you see this kind of several points in the book too. But like, the way that a conflict or a combative action is decided to go down can be with 12 hours ahead of time. Like, they know, like okay, we have this much wind, we have this, the wind is at this angle for us, and we're only going to be able to get this much speed before we have to tack, and they're going to be able to gain on us. So like a combat engagement can be decided even towards the end of the book, where this is the end of the book kind of has a very long falling action after the climax. It's forever, but they end up getting captured, and I mean, that's decided pretty much. Like they know they're pretty much at a lost cause hours beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, I mean, and they depict this well in the film as well too, with when the what was it, when they're after they it's after they go around the horn, I believe, where they end up on their tail, and then he kind of comes around, and if they don't do something, where actually one thing that happens in the film that they have in the book, where they make the decoy, where they put the lamps on the little decoy, and they do that was a real thing that happened too, except it was a little bit more simplified. But Thomas Cochrane did the exact same thing in the Speedy as he did as Jack Aubrey did on the Surprise, not Surprise, the Sophie. All these S names for ships. But yeah, like that's why you had to think outside of the box, and you had a little bit of time to think outside of the box during these engagements, because like it takes so much planning.
Well, and that, I mean, to your point, that's what worked for me, I think, in terms of strategy. You know, for the games I like to play, or you know, we can take it back to Wrath of Khan. You know, the showdown between the Enterprise and the Reliant is decided over days of conflict and planning and strategy, and that, you know, it's almost a battle of will as much as it is a battle of cannons and gunpowder and how many men you have on your boat with guns and rifles and cannons. That to me is where this book absolutely shines, because I am kind of an action fantasy sci-fi combat junkie. You know, when you set up rules for the universe, I want those rules to make sense. And it's one of the things that I think has been betrayed of Star Trek, is making Star Trek into Star Wars and how stuff goes down. Now, Master and Commander comes out. Not comes out. I finally sit down and read Master and Commander. And I don't have to worry about an author taking liberties with how this functions. This is cribbed directly from real life events in a meaningful way, which I'm sure there are tons of parts of these novels which are dramatized or maybe even melodramatically depicted. But you don't get the sense that he's way far off in describing tactics and in how this combat would go down. That seems to me like it's so well researched that it became a part of what the author was happy to share with his readers. Like that was a joyous part of the sharing of the depiction of this time period and what these characters were going through. And that to me also became the most accessible parts of the book. And I was wondering if you had that same sense too, that those elements went hand in hand. Like it seemed to me that this author enjoyed writing those segments more, but also knew that he had to include more of the life of these characters. Like it couldn't just be wall to wall cannon blasts, but that a lot of the sections that aren't combat don't seem to have quite the same passion or joy or expression as the tactical parts of this story.
Well, it's almost one, you know, and if you think about it, and the way I kind of thought about it too, is in this time period, you know, say Jack Aubrey as a character, he's almost a different person when he is on land versus when he's in his element at sea. You know, and a lot of these, like, you know, it's kind of like the discipline of being that was required of all of these men, of these sailors. It allows them to be someone else. Like, for example, Jack Aubrey's character, he's terrible. He's terrible with his money, you know, on land and everything. And it kind of plays for that. Like the style kind of mirrors the differences of the I won't say yin and yang because they don't really complement each other that well, but like the contrast of their life on land versus their life in their element at sea.
He's a barely functional human being in every aspect of his life, except for when he's at the helm of a boat. That's literally what he's built to do. And he will self-destruct if he's not in that role. Like he just doesn't work.
And there's some very interesting, I think it's in Post Captain, I think is when they have the peace, because there's a short period of peace, much to everyone in the Royal Navy's chagrin, before Napoleon takes power. And they actually, then Horatio Hornblower, they actually go over this a little bit too. and yeah, you get to see lots of more of Jack Aubrey's horrific land troubles.
He makes poor choices.
Very poor choices.
But again, I think that's also something that's interesting, and I love how Patrick O'Brien doesn't pull punches. Like, he's not trying to glamorize the fact that what we would consider today the actions of soldiers from then, if they were to operate like they did today, or scratch that, reverse it. If soldiers today were to act like the British Navy, we would find that somewhat distasteful. But for them, this is the way that we make our living. This is how we make money. This is what determines whether or not we're successful. And I'm not good at anything else. So let's go shoot those French guys.
Yep. Well, and no, shoot those French guys and make money.
And make some cash.
Well, also, one thing we should probably make a distinction of, because especially in the film, they talk about the difference between a royal, like a naval vessel, a privateer, and a pirate. So pirates are kind of guys on their own doing whatever. Naval vessels, they're part of a standing navy. Privateers, they actually get, they're basically sponsored by a government to basically go out and be a pirate. So they're legal pirates, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And
Blackwater.
so, yeah. So it's a little bit of extra knowledge that's kind of important to know. So,
but I mean, we're drawing these distinctions. In actual operation, the way that the actions of this crew read in this first book, I don't feel would read that dissimilar from our traditional modern interpretation or depiction of the pirate.
I mean,
like, the main difference is just that they happen to have uniforms of a specific country, but they still kind of go out and do sort of the same things. It's not like the British Navy, like, we have this idea of, the United States military, don't fire unless fired upon. We're this awesome, incredible force that we don't shoot first. But the entire might of our military actually stands down many of our opponents before a shot is fired, because they know that the response is going to be so intense that it wasn't worth trying to hurt some of us right up front. Like, we have a protection of intimidation, fear, and reputation for how we respond to conflict. Here, it's, hey, guys, here's a flag, go get in that boat, and as soon as you see someone different than you, shoot as much as you can and take them out.
Yeah. Well, then the contrast of, because, and in the end, whenever they're captured, like, I mean, it's a very big contrast, because you'll get you'll get big barbarity up until the point where, they strike their colors, and then there's a whole tiptoeing around of surrendering or being on what was it? There was a parole, as it were, where they actually get sent back. So they get sent back to England, though they're on parole from the Spanish and French, basically saying their word that they won't take any up arms against France or Spain until
they're just on the honor system.
Yeah,
like,
it's really on the honor system.
You guys, don't shoot any more of us. So we won't.
Yeah, so it's a crazy contrast. Well, and of course, this idea over the period of 60, 70 years went away from went away with the development of modern war, with the American Civil War all the way through to the World War I, where it was just it was done at that point. And so it's a very much a different age of sensibilities, honor, and I mean, total war wasn't a thing at this point. So it's you could have the luxury of that, but also it's also been dramatized. It's been romanticized as well at this point too.
Well, and the book starts out with an almost duel between two characters, which then become besties. So much of this is structured on that notion. But again, like, it's funny where they draw the lines. I think O'Brien is done a wonderful job depicting it, because it makes me feel strange in trying to where do your loyalties lie? what to you is honorable action because you care about honor and you care about saving face and you care about your reputation. But a lot of these actions in a more modern context, from a more modern sensibility, are some of the most dishonorable
Oh yeah.
reactions you could have in these situations. Like, let's fake what flag we're flying under, get them really close, and then shoot them a whole bunch. We
I know that
tricked
was
them.
well, and I mean, heck, even the desirable tactic in naval combat, what every ship wanted, like a one-on-one ship combat, the basically the KO move is to maneuver your ship and to their rear and what's called rake them fire. Like you line up your broadside to the rear of the rear end of their ship, which has no armor whatsoever. Not armor, but like no thick wood planking at all. And so basically, you can fire down the entire length of the ship through, and you see this in the film actually too, and it's devastating. And you would think that might not be that honorable, but I mean, it's kind of the reality of war versus. And it's an interesting era of these widely contrasting philosophies and how they coincided for this period of time. It's just it's almost it's hard to even imagine those two polar opposite concepts existing in the same space.
And so there's a part of me that can understand. So you described the tactic, raking, a raking fire. Again, trying to exploit one of the known weaknesses of a boat. Raking is popularized in the 1993 Nirvana hit "Rake Me," which is all about, again, the Seattle grunge sound talking about naval warfare. So I would get that tactic. Again, I would exploit that tactic. What I think is kind of funny, though, would be the idea of a standing military that engaged in outright conflict as a first reaction to a vessel from a different country or flying a different flag, and immediately joining into that kind of conflict. Again, I mean, like, we live in such a post-Cold War mentality that any type of confrontation between two nations has the potential for a chain reaction of escalating conflict between superpowers with nuclear weapons. We have headlines in this current political age about, like, oh, two people got in a fist fight in Mozambique, and now we've got nukes pointing all over the world. So to me, again, like, you nailed it when you said this planet, this time period, pre-Napoleonic Wars, had no concept of the total war that was to come from the First World War. Like, no concept of a country's entire manufacturing and population and focus being dedicated to a war effort on all fronts, land and sea. Here, it's just we're only just at peak sailing boat. And only being at peak sailing boat means, like, oh, okay, well, we're going to play a game of tag with cannonballs.
Yeah.
But that's what we're doing. Maybe it's a game of hide and seek sometimes, but most of the time it's just a game of tag. And we're going to capture this vessel, and then we're going to make the first move and shoot first before asking questions or trying to have some sort of reasonable, like, mediation or dispute, through some sort of negotiating. Now we're just gonna open fire every single time we see someone from another country, and sometimes they'll capture our boat and sometimes we'll capture their boat, and we'll just keep trading because boats are expensive. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's, well, and I mean, heck, we're not even getting into the whole the land battles, land warfare aspect of the Napoleonic Wars, which, by the way, if you ever do want to see a good miniseries on that, you should watch Sharp's Rifles with Sean Bean.
Oh, okay.
Which is basically the Horatio Hornblower of land warfare.
Land battle?
Essentially, yes.
I feel like what we need to do. So like next month's book, we're going to be talking about a Star Trek book with a planet killer. And I really feel that next month's book is the Horatio Hornblower of planet eating devices. And so from now on, I think we just need to always compare the book we're reading in some way. How does it relate to Horatio Hornblower?
Yes. Like, oh God. Like we, get. I don't
Like
think I
Ready
can
Player
get.
One. Ready Player One is the Horatio Hornblower of living inside a video game.
The Left Hand of Darkness is the Horatio Hornblower of alien genitalia.
but it doesn't quite rise to the Master and Commander series being the Master and Commander of scrotum purses. So that's
the far side of the world.
That's the far side of the world. Ain't no Horatio Hornblower there. I can tell you that much.
Oh God, we already got the porn versions of these already lined up. Oh man. Russell Crowe get casted for that, right?
And Stephanie Carlson in the live chat, all caps, scrotum person. I've given up. I'm not even gonna try and monetize this. I'm gonna be so shocked if Google turns it back on. We should probably start wrapping up this story. I have to admit to you now, at some point in every book club, there is a failure. It's inevitable that one member of the book club will not finish a book. I did not finish Master and Commander.
No. Okay, what'll happen?
I have about 20% of the book left, and I read ahead a little bit just to make sure that I had wrapped up the final climactic battle. But I have not actually consumed the entire ending of this book.
I'll just record myself and I'll read the rest of it to you.
Just tuck me in at night. Video call.
I will say there's a lot of falling action because the climax of the book is essentially the taking of the Cacafuego, and so we have that, and then you get the whole bit of him not getting the money from them, the infidelity, and then it goes back up a little bit to where they get captured, and then there's a little bit of this downhill a little bit, and then they have there's his court martial, and nope, he's acquitted, done.
So I've been to prepare for this podcast. I was rabidly skimming what I knew were sort of the cliff notes, important moments throughout this book. Haven't really read through the final court martial sequence all on its own. Read through pieces of the Cacafuego and the capture, and I gotta say, I think I was just a little too cavalier with the beginning of this book. I went through that chapter where they were explaining, because you had to send me a document explaining nautical terms and stuff. This is how much handholding I needed
from this book.
Yes,
just amazing. By the way, I cannot sing the praises of this book enough. This is a fantastic book for this.
But I was so cavalier with the first third of this book, and having to reread parts and trying to get into, and then going back. I would make it. I made it through the first battle, went back and reread parts of the opening, and even went back to the very beginning just to kind of resettle the relationship between Stephen and Jack. And then Dylan too, because there's an entire section of this book which is loosely talking about and relating to the political and religious, not overtly, but again, I didn't have a very good grounding in the history of that conflict, so I was a little lost in just why would that matter, or what does it mean that there's an Irishman on this British boat? Okay, that actually should probably that's relevant to something. Now let me go and look up Wikipedia. What does that mean? So it took me a while to get through all that. So I'm still looking to finish this book, but I think it's one of those. I will probably not be joining you on numerous entries into this series, unfortunately.
And it's very much, as someone said in the chat too, it's very much written for people who can vividly picture it, and especially it's people who have a passion for this era definitely have an advantage when it comes to approaching the book.
Like for me,
And
it was being underread on a lot of history surrounding the events and the time frame of this book. So
right.
for me, it comes with something that I don't have as much of a problem with. Funnily enough, when we're talking about like Three Musketeers era, like I
Oh,
got a
really?
little bit more instruction in the history of that time period, and then I have a wife who's really into historical drama and historical fiction too. It's just
Well,
you put that time period on boats, and man, I don't know boats.
well, and it's a testament. It's just a testament to how well they translated it to film.
Yeah,
Because, I mean, the source material is just so dense that, like, they took out the excess of what they didn't need, and they made. And I am so incredibly impressed at Peter Weir's. Peter Weir, yeah, his ability to just translate that in a way that's relatable, but doesn't give any on the. I won't say like historical accuracy, but the faithfulness to history.
yeah. Well,
That,
and wrapping
yeah.
that up in a very faithful representation of the adventure parts of the
Mm-hmm.
story, where again I feel like the author here, O'Brien, is most successful in conveying his passion for that adventure. I feel like the film definitely captures the spirit of that tremendously well. Not having read the books till well, not even having finished the book, um, you even get a sense of that from the first viewing of the movie. It feels like there's something special about this, and it's a shame that that series didn't find whatever attention it needed through Hollywood producers to
Mm-hmm.
be continued.
And there's something to be said about having it be a single. It makes it a little bit more special. I feel like that
Oh
it's a
yeah,
single
I totally feel
story,
like, let's say this had become some,
like a
it
franchise.
had blown up in a way that Hollywood couldn't ignore, that it needed to produce sequels. Then I would have felt you had producers who would have been tasked with needing to make sequels. And
Mm-hmm.
it definitely reads, this one film, Master and Commander: Far Side of the World, definitely reads as a passion project for the people involved, less this is a franchise that we're beholden to.
I will say that film had the best ending music ever with the playing Baccarini with playing like a ukulele. Like I swear when I was reading this book I listened to that little piece because they actually never released that actual like that recording of the very end one
Mhm.
from the film, so I had to obtain it and just listen to that through probably about half of this book.
Well, and also, I mean, I was actually kind of grateful that the moment in the film wasn't a part of this book, where they have still no wind, the still
Oh, the
seas,
doldrums. Yeah, I think
and
that's in. No, I
the
think that's in the Far Side of the World.
the conclusion to that is still like hauntingly one of the most upsetting moments of that film to me is the character that jumps into the ocean holding a cannonball to to end this superstitious weather anomaly that they're experiencing, because it's like my life or everyone else's, and it becomes like this Spock moment. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one, so let me just go drown myself with this cannonball.
I know. Well,
Terrible.
they had that character in. Sorry, my thing kind of like wigged out on me there. But they had the character of Hollum in Far Side of the World, but
Mhm.
he was depicted very differently, and I think he was he had like an affair with somebody on the wife of somebody on the crew or on board, and I think they murdered him.
Oh, well, that's different. Like,
So
that would have been fine. I'm fine with
I
murder.
like what they did in the film a little bit with him. Though I mean, they even mentioned the Jonah in this, like for like a couple of times, and then we never hear a bit from him again. Essentially,
He's never heard from again.
well, and it was like, and the whole idea of like the Jonah with this is it's more of like a superstition rather than like somebody didn't really fit in, so they kind of viewed him as the Jonah versus like he's bringing the Phantom on, sort of thing. So, and that was kind of a I am glad that they didn't take it to that full-on extent, because that was probably the weakest part of the film for me, was some of that.
Mm.
But it was kind of one of those stereotypical things that they kind of needed to have in one of those nautical films. Like every single Napoleonic sailing vessel movie needs to have a flogging scene, you know? So
mandatory. Yeah. even like Amistad. I don't know. I'm sure there was a flogging scene in that somewhere.
Yeah.
For those reasons.
Oh man.
Well, I want to. I actually do want to say I thank you for bringing this book up, because I know you were revisiting a piece of literature, and I do have to apologize for not actually being able to finish it properly with you. But I always think it's fun when you get to that one, like, oh yeah, I'm at the book club. So what did you think of the interpretation of this character and the metaphor? Yeah, I thought it was good. Like during that, like, I'm back in high school, can I BS my way through a conversation about the interpretation of this novel?
Well,
maybe.
Well, and it's you don't know if it's something that you'll like until you actually get into the meat and potatoes of it. And sometimes that's it's okay for it to not necessarily be something that's entirely up your alley, because how are you going to grow otherwise?
Well, but what it has elicited is, like, it has sort of reopened that door. It sort of reignited that desire to catch Horatio Hornblower.
Mm-hmm.
So again, there are little things, like, I can definitely point to this at the same time as I'm going to point to this and be like, it also kind of makes me want to watch Star Trek 2 again, even though I watch that like every 6 months. Like, I don't really need a reason, but this is as good a reason as any for me to want to rewatch Wrath of Khan. Again, more successful, the most successful version of, like, naval combat through Star Trek metaphor. And again, it kind of lights up that kind of passion or that kind of desire again. So at least that's kind of fun.
Oh man, yeah. It makes me want to watch and read Hunt for October at some point.
Oh, dude. Well, and again, I mean, like, that all gets wrapped up too. Like, I get twitchy and claustrophobic and itchy, and I don't enjoy it, but it's like I've got to throw on Das Boot every now and then.
Oh, it's such a good movie. No,
it's such an amazing movie, and it freaks me out. Like,
do you watch it with subtitles or dubbing?
Oh, subtitles.
Because interesting thing about the dubbing was 90% of the original cast went and did their own dubbing.
Oh yeah, but I'm the obnoxious nerd about anime too. Like, I would much rather just listen to the original voices that I can't understand and read subtitles to inform the emotion of what's going on, rather than the somewhat inconsistent emotional portrayal of what the characters are going through a dub. And that's mostly just through working way too much in commercial voiceover and listening to the re-recording and going, no, that's not quite right. Oh, that's not exactly what he's saying. The lip flap is, oh, I'm having a hard time with this, and I'd rather just read.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You, especially with a historical piece, you feel closer to the source material, which is, and that's what I did while I was reading this, is you're kind of viewing a window, even though it's a fictionalized story, you're viewing a window into history. And that is what makes it so tantalizing and so fun and rewarding for me as a history geek.
So the last question I've got for you then, and we can put a pin in all this, how many of these books have you made it through, and what are your plans for continuing the series? Because, like I said, I probably won't join you on future iterations of this book, but there are a couple other book series that I think we should revisit in future episodes. If it's it's The Expanse, or if it's the Three Body Problem, or any of those other series of books that we've read previously. Where are you at with your readership on Patrick O'Brian?
I am okay. So I've read Master Commander, Post Captain, and I've gotten because I stopped reading them around 2005. So I don't think I finished HMS Surprise, which is the third one. I'd like to continue them and finish them. I'd actually like to read Post Captain again, because that one's really interesting, because he gets like this. He gets this assigned to the ship that's really weird, where it has basically two bows, and it's all sorts of weird hijinks kind of go on with that. But I mean, I'd like to. I'm interested to get one where it's a wide, like a farther geographically ranging story.
Gotcha.
Because I don't feel like I've gotten so much into that, like getting into, say, the Pacific or in the Indian Ocean, where they're like really out there on the edges of the fringes, you know.
Right.
That I would like to get into that, but it's just, you know, I don't know when. I'll get into that, but I really would like to, though. So because also I have Stockholm syndrome with history, so you know.
So basically, what I'm asking is like, are we saying by the end of 2019 you'll have read all 20 books?
That's no
challenge.
That's not by 2019, but maybe before I die. You know.
Don't put it off, Andrew. You never know when your ticket's up. Let's make this a really awkward appeal to mortality at the end of our awesome podcast. So on that note, you brought us Master and Commander. Yes. And like I said, I thank you for bringing this. This was revisiting for you. I need a break. I need my science fiction cotton candy for a month. The pressure off my overheating mental faculties. So for next month's book, this is for May. This is going to be an easy read. We are going to pick up. Oh, you're holding it. Hold it up for the camera.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we're going to do some. This is going to be our first Star Trek novel, Star Trek: The Next Generation, Vendetta.
I might even wear my Starfleet uniform while we do this.
I might see if I can find mine. If not, I'll at least wear my communicator pin and at least do it up that way. But yeah, this is a book that I'm returning to. So I'm bringing back something that I've read. You haven't read this one.
No. And this is written by Peter David, who is a very renowned author. I love how this is Vendetta, the giant novel.
And it's like 300 pages, something like that. It's not that long.
It is 399 pages.
It's okay, 400 pages. So 400 pages, that's still like a chunk of book, but that's not giant. You know, it's like but it's coming out of that era of, like you were saying, the classic Trek pocket novels. It's almost like pulp novels surrounding Star Trek characters. This one has a heavy tie-in with the Borg, but it predates so many of the things that became standard Borg that they've written rules in the book that don't apply to where we know Borg storylines go after when this book is supposed to take place. Guinan has this really interesting relationship with the other characters that doesn't resemble the relationship Guinan really has in the show. It's this great little sort of nugget of Trek that's not canon, doesn't really exist in Star Trek, and yet it's still so Star Trek.
Well, this came out around 1991, so that'd be season 5, I think, of TNG. Yeah, so this came out around season 5. So this is before we even got to see the Borg come back. Well, sort of the Borg come back for is it Descent? The Descent two-parter with Lore and Data. Yeah. So, and is this before Hugh even?
No, I don't think it's before Hugh. I could be wrong.
It might be because it was Hugh season 4 or season because Best of Both Worlds was season 3 to season 4.
Iborg.
Oh yeah. Oh god.
No. Iborg is 92. It's 1992.
Oh, really? So this is before Hugh even. Yeah. So this is the first. This is the very first story that was presented after Best of Both Worlds, then with the Borg.
And if I'm not mistaken, I do believe that there is also sort of like not a disclaimer, but some sort of preface about like Borg and gender, which then also is just completely thrown. I mean, we'll get into it for the actual show, but I need to like preface that this book exists in its alternate reality, Star Trek, in a great way, and absolutely not canon, but from an author that writes in a Star Trek voice so exceedingly well that it still manages to be like Star Trek. So the big experiment is this for me is another one of those can you go home again kinds of novels. In my brain, 1993, 13-year-old Juan, this was the coolest book, Star Trek book that you could possibly write. Like this is the ultimate Star Trek novel for 13-year-old me. In my brain, it has sort of existed as this epic storytelling adventure Star Trek story, ticking all of the boxes of what I love about epic, again, sort of cotton candy, popcorn cinema, sci-fi. I'm doubting very much that this book can live up to my expectations. 13-year-old me now as a more discerning connoisseur of science fiction. So I hope people will join us on this Trek adventure, because it could be amazing or it could be terrible. But either way, even if it's terrible, it's still gonna be amazing.
So. I can't wait. This is going to be so much fun. I mean, now it's a whole reason for me to while I'm reading this book to listen to my entire Star Trek film score discography.
Yup.
Yup. Oh man,
yep.
I'm going to be pumped for this.
I'm going to be kicking it to Best of Both Worlds. The score to Best of Both Worlds, because it's just.
Yeah, well, there's a whole thing about like the composer actually was booted from Trek because he was making individual themes that were more recognizable for certain characters and groups, and the showrunners didn't want that.
Nope.
Yeah.
Again,
I digress. It was interesting.
Ahead of its time, because that's stuff that we care about today. So, Star Trek: The Next Generation Vendetta, the giant novel.
Giant. Yeah.
This is just the dumbest thing to put on.
I know. I showed this to some of my coworkers, and they're like, "The giant novel."
The giant novel. Like, as this author only ever read like single issues of comic books?
Yeah,
why would you say that? Okay, so I am irrationally and giddily excited for our book in May, Star Trek: The Next Generation Vendetta, the giant novel, available in paperback and in Kindle. If I can't find my copy of it, I'll probably end up grabbing a Kindle version of it. But I hope you'll come back, join us next month for Vendetta, because I think this is going to be a rollicking good time. Here's my hypothesis: it will be 30% celebration of things we love about Star Trek and 70% mocking the shit out of what we eventually arrive at. That's my guess. And if you want to join us on that experiment, if you want to dive down that rabbit hole with us, two massive Trek nerds, I implore you, please pick up a copy of Vendetta, read it throughout the month of May, and then we'll have dates up on SomeGadgetGuy.com when we're going to do our recording of next month's Geek Book Club.
Yeah. We can't wait, guys. This is gonna be a heck of a lot of fun. And any reason to put on my Star Trek uniform.
True story indeed. Okay, well, that's gonna wrap it up for this month's episode. I think we should try and do, I don't know, like some sort of companion or follow-up. I still haven't rewatched Master and Commander: Far Side of the World, but you were saying that maybe we should take it to Twitch and do a little gameplay.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Game stream while we talk about the movie too. So if we can get our butts in gear and get a live stream out for that, then we'll also post about that on the Twitters and the Instagrams, on the Facebooks, where you can find more news about the Geek Book Club. You will find us at the Geek Book Club on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook. That's where all of the news about each episode is out. Of course, you can also follow us individually if you just want to get into general tech and pop culture and film discussion, where Andrew on Twitter is at Fat Produce, and I, of course, am humbly at SomeGadgetGuy. We're going to catch you next month for Vendetta, the Star Trek: The Next Generation giant novel, not pocket novel, giant novel. I hope you'll join us for that. And again, thank you to everyone who's been watching the show, sharing the show, also catching us, subscribing through the RSS feed. We are catching back up to the dual discussions that we had on Ready Player One and the film. So the audio versions of those podcasts are out now too, as will this one be showing up very shortly on that RSS feed, where you can subscribe through Google Play, through iTunes, or wherever you catch your podcasts. You can catch the Geek Book Club. So, folks, that's going to do it for us tonight, and we will catch you next month for another book discussion that we hope you'll join us for. So, happy reading, be well, and we'll catch you next month.
See you guys.